For 209 years, the northern kingdom of Israel stood sovereign. Then, Assyria marched in, and an entire nation was wiped off the map. During its 2 centuries of existence, the northern kingdom was ruled by 20 kings. According to the historical record, every single one of them perpetuated policies and religious practices that actively defied God. There was absolutely no era of reform. It is tempting to look at the fall of Samaria as standard ancient geopolitics, a smaller kingdom swallowed by a ruthless superpower. But the writers of 2 Kings point to a different mechanism at work. The ultimate outcome of this history is the permanent removal of the people from the presence of God, a consequence that far outweighs the physical loss of their land. This conceptual ledger illustrates the text of 2 Kings 17 as a formal legal proceeding. This is a covenant lawsuit. It presents the history of the exile not as a sudden outburst of divine anger, but as an objective, documented breach of contract. The judge in this case sent prophets to warn the nation for over 200 years. The sheer length of that timeline demonstrates immense patience. Yet, when the final verdict arrived, the legal ruling was absolute and unyielding. Which brings us to the central question of the chapter. What specific actions legally compelled a God defined by infinite grace to permanently evict his own chosen people from their home? The prosecution opens its case by pointing back to the kingdom's founder, Jeroboam. He set a precedent of religious deviation that every subsequent leader followed and amplified. It started with pragmatic, minor adjustments. The people began worshiping at unauthorized regional high places, rather than traveling to the central temple in Jerusalem. It was convenient. Over several generations, those minor infractions mutated. The culture normalized the worship of carved idols, which paved the way for the adoption of divination and dark magical arts. The descent eventually reached the darkest violation of the covenant, families burning their own children in the fire as offerings to foreign deities. The text notes that despite continuous warnings from a relentless stream of prophets, the people remained stiff-necked. They deliberately sold themselves to do evil, operating as willing participants in their own destruction. The record in 2 Kings identifies a specific consequence of this era. By pursuing idols described as worthless, the people themselves became hollow. They took on the characteristics of the objects they served. Following the exile, the once thriving capital of Samaria was reduced to empty, windswept ruins. A physical and spiritual vacuum was left behind. The Assyrian Empire had a standard protocol for newly conquered territories. They imported foreign nomadic populations from other regions to resettle the desolate land, effectively breaking any lingering national identity. When wild lions began attacking these new settlers, they panicked. Operating on deep superstition, they assumed they had offended the local deity and scrambled to appease the so-called god of the land, strictly to avoid being killed. This diagram shows how they structured their new worship. They grafted the orthodox rituals of Yahweh on one side with their existing pagan practices on the other, overlapping into a chaotic, corrupted center. This is syncretism, the deliberate blending of entirely contradictory belief systems into a single unstable hybrid. The result was a strange new society in Samaria. The people maintained a superficial fear of the Lord to keep themselves safe, while their true loyalty and active servitude remained firmly attached to their own regional gods. The mixed religion that grew in the ruins of Samaria functions as a direct mirror for how belief structures operate today. The modern equivalent of syncretism often takes the form of secularized faith. It is the condition where people publicly claim belief in a divine authority, yet their daily decisions and priorities run entirely on secular, cultural values. It demands a hard look at how we treat divine instruction. We have to ask ourselves if we view Scripture as binding law, or if we treat it as optional reference material, adopting the parts that fit our lifestyle while ignoring the rest. Believers frequently replicate the dual worship of those ancient settlers. We profess reverence for God in name, while functionally spending our energy serving the modern idols of wealth, status, and personal comfort. The judge overseeing the covenant lawsuit operates with deep, enduring patience, yet his requirement for loyalty is absolute and demands total exclusivity. The fall of Israel warns us to examine the minor concessions in our own lives. Those tiny rationalized deviations are where faith erosion begins, long before a total collapse. Genuine faith admits no dilution. This history suggests that an undivided loyalty is the requirement for securing what the Northern Kingdom discarded, the enduring presence of God.